Welcome to PM Express Business Edition. Now, managers of the economy over the years have rolled several measures aimed at or trying to improve collections in relation to the size of the economy and other activities. Now, some will say, but for some, it still appears that the country has a long way to go to properly address this challenge. So, with all these developments, are we assured that the measures outlined in the 2026 budget will indeed help deal with this situation when it comes to raising the required revenue? Well, on PM Express Business Edition, we focus on these tax measures announced in the 2025 budget announced by the Finance Minister, Dr. Kessil Atuforsen. The big question here is that, will this indeed help the revenue situation and help us meet the over 200 billion Ghana cedis that the Finance Minister is hoping to collect next year when it comes to raising money to finance the expenditure? But let's try and set the record straight, or maybe get some background for people to appreciate. Of course, in the 2026 budget, these were some of the tax reforms, implement and enforce tax measures within the digital economy, stronger tax administration, and improve compliance to boost domestic revenue. Completion of what they will call the rollout of the unified taxpayer identification system, also reduce the effective VAT rate from 21.9% to 20%, raise the VAT threshold from 200,000 to 750,000, and also extend the zero rating VAT on supply of locally manufactured textiles to 2028. Now, tax incidents and also some understanding, basically, so you look at VAT of one levy of 1% of a current value of 10, and also NHIL 25. And I have a tax person here who will tell me whether I'm giving rubbish or actually making some sense. And also when it comes to the GET fund. So more of trying to let you appreciate the incidence of tax after the VAT reforms and how much people would pay actually. For instance, if you're looking at a purchase of about 1,000 Ghana cedis, these are the taxes that you are likely to pay going forward based on these reforms. That's what you're seeing that in the 2026 budget, the VAT reforms, you're looking at the VAT levy or the COVID-19 levy has been abolished, and we are going to lose almost like 3 or 3 point something billion Ghana cedis. GET fund and HIL also decoupled, and no VAT on prospecting that comes to the extractive industry, and also VAT registration threshold. Of course, it has been increased. Let's look at the trend in the COVID-19 levy revenue as well. When it started, and now you're doing somewhere around 3.8 billion Ghana cedis. Now, I'll be asking my guests in studio, how or where can we raise the revenue in terms of all these things? So on PM Express Business Edition tonight, you're looking at these tax measures that were outlined in the budget and whether indeed they will help us be able to raise more than the 200 billion Ghana cedis. You know, for some people, you think that it's remote. Now, you always talk about a rising debt stock. It has to be revenue. You talk about it's also about the revenue and also containing the expenditure. It always has been about revenue, and tax collections and prudent spending of this money that you've raised. That is why on PM Express Business Edition, we'll be having a discussion on these tax measures, engaging a director at PwC Ghana, Abeku Jan Kwanzaa, is with me in studio, more of playing in the tax space and legal services, and also an economist as well at the University of Ghana Economics Department, Dr. Edu Osusakwede. He is joining us virtually. Now, all these things wrapped up on PM Express Business Edition. We'll be right back after this break. So indeed, you've heard from the Finance Minister. You've also heard from some businesses. But tonight on PM Express Business Edition, we'll be focusing heavily on these tax measures that the Finance Minister has outlined in the budget and whether indeed we would end 2026 in mobilizing the over 200 million Ghana cedis as you do our assessment of these issues on PM Express Business Edition. I'll be engaging the Director of the Center for Policy Scrutiny, that is, and also an economist at the University of Ghana, Economics Department, Dr. Dosu Sarkodie, Jonas Vazum, and also in studio here are with me, Director at PwC Ghana, Abeku Jan Kwanzaa, who is going to do some one-on-one for us to appreciate when it comes to the... So Abeku, help us out when it comes to the taxes in the budget and what government is trying to do. Because some are saying that we've had this before in terms of these tax measures, and some are saying that, well, a little bit skeptical whether things will be good for us.
All right. So thank you very much, George. Before we get to the conversation of we've heard it before, let's set the context properly. So before we started this program, you did indicate that we need to spend. And that spending ought to be financed. Yeah. So I think a proper place to start from is to show the average person who is following us tonight on how the 2026 budget looks like. So in 2026, we are expecting to spend about a little over 300 billion. So you keep talking about 200 billion plus for taxes. But let's start with expenditure of over 300 billion. This expenditure of over 300 billion will be financed by revenues and grants of about 261 billion. Whether or not, and I think at a particular point in time, you begin to ask whether we can achieve or not, let's look at where we came from 2025. So from 2025, George, this is what essentially happened. So we are expecting that by the close of this year, 2025, revenues and grants should be about 227, for which we want to move to 268. Expenditure would move from 250 to about 300 billion, and our deficit obviously would also increase. Now, from what you see up here, we expect that revenue and expenditure would approximately increase by the same percentages. Now, George, I like having these conversations so that you can feel it. So let's bring it down to what it means to the average man. In Ghana, it is projected we are about 35 million people. So if you're about 35 million and we want to spend about 300 billion, what it means is that the government of Ghana, on average, will be spending about 9,000 cedis a year on the average Ghanaian. So for your roads, to pay our medics, to pay the military and all those guys, on average, it's going to cost us about 9,000 cedis per year. How do we finance that? In terms of financing, revenue and grants per individual would be about 8,000 cedis per year. George, obviously, you may end up paying more than 8,000 cedis per year. Somebody will pay less than 8,000 cedis per year. The children may pay far less unless you send them to go and buy popcorn or something, and then they may pay some VAT when they go there. But on average, George, what we need to take away before we get into the nitty-gritties is that as far as 2026 is concerned, on average, we expect that we'll have a deficit of 1,000 cedis per individual. Government expects to spend about 9,000 cedis per individual on average, and then per average or per individual, we expect to contribute about 8,000. So, George, if you decide to pay 1,000 more, everybody decides to pay 1,000 more. Obviously, the capacities are not the same, but if everybody does
the whole incidence about tax, the more you earn, the more you pay.
The more you pay.
All
right. So, out of this 268, you keep talking about 200 plus. So, the figure is about 224 billion. And tax accounts for about 80% of this. And I think that is why probably you selected the whole idea. Let's talk about taxes. Because if you have about 268 billion to raise, and tax alone accounts for about 80% of that, which is about 224, then it is worth having the conversation about tax. So if you are ready, we can just go straight in.
Let's go through
the tax.
But in terms of just go back a little bit.
Yes.
In terms of the revenue and grants, we are in November. How are we doing so far when it comes to the raising of revenue to finance our expenditure? How are we doing with respect to this target?
For 2025.
Yeah.
So we are slightly behind. We are slightly behind the budget that we had. So just for the average Ghanaian to know, because 2024 was an election year, our first budget for this year was presented in March to our parliament. Then in July, based on the laws of Ghana, you need to review it, come back and tell the people of Ghana whether I'm on track or I'm not on track. But broadly, the principal revenue targets are slightly behind the revised budget that we have. But government is optimistic, based on this provisional outing, that we should raise about 270 billion.
In 1 month?
Well, hopefully we shall do that.
GRA says it's going to be out, going out to be heavy on compliance. That could be the reason.
And I'm sure probably you saw the issue about the night enforcement.
Yes.
So maybe these are all ways and means by which we could close the gap.
Okay.
Yes. So moving in straight, George. Once again, George, the conversation should involve the average Ghanaian.
Yeah.
And a lot of Ghanaians are Christians. When we go to church, George, there are so many ways by which you raise income for the churches. Some pay tithes, some pay collections. We do Kofi and Ama, we do harvest, we do pledges.
Yeah.
So in the same vein, in Ghana, we have so many buckets in raising taxes. But broadly, George, there are three main categories that we have. We have taxes on income and property, and I think the name itself defines what it's going after.
Yeah.
We have taxes on goods and services. So I walk into Joy FM, I say, put up an advert for me. When you give me an invoice, you see a tax there.
Yeah.
And then lastly, we have taxes on international trade.
Yeah.
So you decide to buy something from abroad instead of buying it locally. When those things cross the border, you may typically end up paying taxes. So in broad terms, look at taxes within these categories.
Okay.
Some may even add a fourth one to say, George, we don't want people to break down our health facilities. We don't want people to smoke. We don't want people to take too much sugar. So you may have some element of taxes in this particular area. So to guide our audience, I think this perspective helps. So as I go through the conversation, I will draw attention to which particular things the government of Ghana is looking at. Okay. So having said that, George, let's go straight into the tax measures. Yeah. So many of them, but I've broken them down into 5 main categories to help us understand everything that is happening. So the first thing, George, is the VAT bill. Yeah. One of the things that I would commend government about, and even if this government didn't come to power and the previous government continued, they all agreed that our VAT ought to be reformed. Yeah. So if you look at the March budget, the government of Ghana gave us broad indications. And at the start of this program, you did highlight some of them. I would cancel COVID. I would bring a standard rate down. I would do this. I would decouple. Yeah. So clearly the government carried us on in March, in July, to tell us that the VAT would be reformed. Now, the reform is significant such that government has felt the need to introduce a new VAT bill to Parliament. And if Parliament approves that, it will become a new VAT law. The last principal law for VAT that we have is the VAT Act of 2013. We are having a conversation in 2025. So it is 12 years down the line. Yeah. So government says there is the need to reform that. So that is clear. Now, George, going back, and using the church example, I told you that we need to look at various categories, right? So I told you that we have taxes on income and property, taxes on goods and services, and international trade. So if government has picked out the one on the VAT, there are still elements that has to be dealt with. So for 2026, and I would encourage Ghanaians, and interestingly, I saw something on the parliamentary Facebook page this evening, to say that Ghanaians are encouraged to participate in the legislative process. So on the 22nd, there's going to be a Zoom by Parliament so that the citizen can know how to participate. All right? So going back, apart from the VAT, we're expecting 3 significant tax bills in 2026. Okay. And these 3 significant tax bills will be a tax bill for income tax, a tax bill for customs, and a tax bill for excise. The last time we had an income tax act, or the current income tax act that we are using, that was in 2015. So if there's a new one coming in 2026 or 2027, that would have been 11 or 12 years. The world has changed. We're going to have something new for customs. The Customs Act was 2015. So if there's going to be a new one, that's also about 11 years. Yeah. And the excise one was in 2014. So if you're going to change it or have a new one, then that would have about 12 years. Yeah. So the broad measure that government is saying is that, look, Ghana is not an island. I want to change my laws to align with global happenings, amongst others. Hence, I will review some of these things. So let's be in expectant mood for that and then follow that accordingly. The next thing is, and this hasn't come up a lot, but it is worth discussing. The government of Ghana clearly has a major policy agenda, the 24-hour economy. All right? In addition to that, government is being quite big on agribusiness. So the budget actually includes the government would introduce tax incentives and rebate for agribusiness. So for those who have not considered agriculture as a way of livelihood, should potentially consider that. But of course, it goes beyond just producing and selling raw. So you must look at the food chain. Now, in doing this, we just hope that, George, you will record that at a particular point in time, people in this country were complaining that we're giving out too many exemptions. Yeah. So if you see agribusiness tax incentive, I'm going to say that is also another form of exemptions. Yeah. And George, you and I will keep saying that our tax to GDP ratio is low. But hold on. George, tax to GDP is essentially tax divided by GDP. So if your GDP is growing because we're doing agribusiness, but the contribution from the top is not enough, your tax to GDP ratio would obviously be low.
Yeah.
So these are the conversations that we need to have. That to what extent are we going to give the incentive? But the incentive obviously drives behavior. So somebody may not think of going into farming, but because they've heard government is going to introduce tax incentives, I'll put my money into farming. So the base would grow, but then we need to have a conversation on the top line.
But as these incentives actually work, because the argument is that, and a typical example is US. Some are saying that when you give this incentive to big businesses, they don't actually invest and employ more. They go out and buy stocks, bonds, and do other things. And so there's a question there about the effectiveness of these incentives.
George, I think the incentives work. George, they work because...
Based on empirical evidence?
Yes.
All right.
Because, George, if you do certain things and people react in a certain way and their behaviors change, then I believe it works. So let's give an example of the conversation that is happening on the SEC. So at a particular point in time, we gave exemptions when you sell your stocks. They keep complaining that because that exemption no longer exists, the interests of people in the stock exchange is sort of going down. I don't have reason to doubt them. In essence, what they are telling us is that because the tax measure has changed, we'll be talking about other tax measures, has changed, this is what is actually happening.
Okay.
So that's the second major tax measure I want us to talk about.
Okay.
And for us all to focus. And of course, I like the way you're going with this debate, George. If we believed agribusiness is not going to be the way to go, raise the concern to your MP. And let's have a conversation around this area.
As a look at the bill actually before
Brilliant.
Parliament. Okay.
Brilliant. The next thing is the issue around significant digital or economic presence rules. So, George, about 100 years ago, we actually introduced rules for cross-border supply for cross-border taxation. Now, those rules basically, broadly, said that for you to be able to tax somebody who is not really based in your country, that person must have a physical presence within your country. So that when you're looking for the person, you know where to go and arrest the MD and ensure that there is enforcement. The world has moved. George, previously, if you wanted to listen to music, you don't go on Apple Play.
No.
What you did was to buy Cantamanto. You buy your CD, your cassettes, you turn it this way, and that's what you played. Yeah. When those cassettes crossed our borders, George, they paid custom duties if they were not exempt. Now, customs cannot catch Apple Play.
Virtual, yeah.
They cannot catch virtual. So obviously, some revenue may be lost there as far as individuals are concerned. Yeah. So what we did a few years ago in our VAT law was to actually introduce VAT on e-commerce. Yeah. That is being supplied by non-resident providers. So they don't have a base in Ghana, but their market is in Ghana. So we told them that not a problem. If you're not in Ghana, but your base is in Ghana, when you are supplying to Ghanaians and you meet certain conditions, please charge them VAT and send the money to the government of Ghana.
Oh, okay.
And as a consultant, I can tell you that that is largely happening. Now, what government is saying is that, hold on, those were VAT paid by its Ghanaian persons. Now I want to elevate the conversation to say, just like Joy FM does not just remit VAT to me as a government of Ghana, Joy FM also remits to me its income tax. Yeah. So can we begin getting income tax from these persons? How government is going to design it, we wait to see the details. But then government is saying that I want to go beyond just VAT on digital services to find ways and means to get some form of income tax from these guys. Yes. So when people say, oh, the budget, this relief, that relief, these are hidden things that would potentially give us some money. I am not in any way saying that it is going to give us about the 3.7 that the COVID would give us. But of course, as I keep saying, taxes influence behavior, George. Yeah. If Joy FM tomorrow tells you that, George, you're going to be taxed at 100% because the government of Ghana has introduced a new law, I'm probably thinking that you'll be like, I won't come to work again. I'll just sleep and probably gain some additional weight. So taxes obviously influence behavior. So this is a measure that hopefully government should get some money when they probably legislate this. The only thing that we need to look at is the challenges in implementing such rules and the fact that the world is not really aligned on some of these things. Okay. The third thing that I want us to talk about, George, is the issue of tax stamp on edible oils. So, George, I'm sure when I got into your office, you gave me a bottle of water. Now, on the top of that bottle of water, you see a tax stamp there.
But this is not just for edible oil, because I know there's a beverage tax stamp issue and all the rest.
So there's a beverage. So there's a beverage. At a point, we had conversations on textiles. Now, the next conversation that we're having is tax stamp on edible oils. Okay. All right? The whole idea of the one for the beverage, part of the government's argument, was that, George, there were things that were being smuggled into the country. So if I don't see that stamp on it, then it gives me an indication that certain things are not being done properly. All right? Then we got into the case whereby we said there were a lot of pirated textiles.
Products,
so let us track them again. Then we started talking about the issue around tax stamps on that. Now the next conversation is the issue of edible oil. And once again, the objective and the reasoning is quite similar. Government believes that these things have been smuggled, so I want to track them. The last thing that I will talk about, George, before we now get into the VAT that everybody is probably waiting for, is the issue of an airport development fee.
But there's an airport tax.
There's an airport tax.
So,
and that airport tax have been there since 1963.
So why the development fees?
All right. So maybe the airport tax is not enough.
Oh. Then why don't they increase
government
the rates
says,
then?
okay, so that's the conversation that we're going to be having on this.
Okay, all right.
So government says an airport development fee, you are saying, can this fee be part of the airport tax?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very brilliant idea. It's a brilliant idea because what it then does for us is that not only people in Ghana that may end up paying this fee, but anybody that comes to visit us that may be taking a plane out of Ghana would pay this. In any case, the last time that we amended the rates, which is 50 Ghana cedis when you travel in Ghana. So from Accra to Kumasi, you pay 50 Ghana cedis as airport tax. So next time, pay attention to your breakdown, and then you see that.
I don't know how many people who actually look at that. Actually, they complain that the tickets are expensive,
but there's a 50 cedis in there.
In that ticket here.
When you take a plane from here to West Africa, there's also some sort of tax in there. If you go beyond West Africa, there is a tax. And George, you probably enjoy flying business class. The more class you fly, or the higher the class, the higher the tax that you should pay. So I agree with you very much that if we have an airport development fee, government is saying, I want to put up a new airport, I want to renovate some existing airports, and create a link between Kotoka Terminal 2 and Kotoka Terminal 3.
Is that necessary? Because so I think that the movement, the traffic, and I educate me, I know that it moved to Terminal 3, even though the airport company is trying to move some airlines again
to Terminal 2.
To Terminal 2 because of that pressure. But
correct.
Okay, fine.
Well, just sometimes I hold a view that we vote our executives or we vote a government into being. We expect that they will do certain things properly on our behalf. So that is why, as at this stage, I may agree with you on the conversation that is it necessary, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt that as an airport company, they have done work. And currently, what actually happens is that when we collect the tax, we give 100% of the airport tax to the airport company. We pass the law actually to support doing that. So let's assume that all those things have been done, and now they want to do this. And you and I agree on the point that we should raise this through the airport tax mechanism than a different fee, considering the fact that it's been over about 13, 14 years since we last revised the rates anyway. So at this point, I don't know whether, George, you have any questions for us to probe, and then now we get into the major ones.
But the problem is with the tax stamp, and it appears that if you engage the beverage companies, and we'll also be joining on Zoom as well to engage our senior economist as well, Dr. Du Sakwede, on these issues as well. So Doc will be coming back to you very soon. But the bit about the tax stamp, it appears that we are struggling because a lot of these products are finding their way onto the market, and they are beating the Ghana Revenue Authority officials. Now, these companies like Coca-Cola, Guinness Ghana are coming out to complain that, listen, we are having these goods coming in from Nigeria, they are similar, but when you go on the market, they don't tell you, but the Guinness or the Malta Guinness from Nigeria is cheaper than the Malta Guinness from Ghana. And they are paying taxes. That's smuggled goods. They are not paying taxes on it.
So, George, we all have a responsibility as citizens of this country. When you go to the market and you see that malt you're talking about, does it have the stamp on it? If it doesn't have the stamp on it, then we, as people of Ghana, should know that that is possibly a smuggled good. Government cannot be everywhere.
Some will say that, listen, my job is to get a good product on the market. The job of the tax officials and Ghana Revenue Authority is to ensure that all these products are fixed with the stamps.
George agreed. But you also have a responsibility to ensure that when you see this, report them to the Ghana Revenue Authority.
Yeah, will share their 3%
with you.
That's just by the way here.
All right, so George, we've dealt with 4 additional areas that have not been in the media enough. Now we'll go on straight to deal with the issue of VAT. VAT in Ghana behaves like Liverpool. They don't work alone. VAT doesn't work alone.
Okay.
So VAT works with 3 additional levies. And those levies are 1 for health, 1 for education, and the last for COVID. So we're minding our own business. COVID found itself into Ghana, and we had to pay a levy for that. The first thing that is going to change is that maybe the hair will now become a he levy. So VAT and he levy, or VAT and HEL, whatever the case is. The COVID levy, the minister was clear that actually what he said was that it was going to go today, but in effect, what he's basically telling you is that by the end of this year, if Parliament aligns with him, and I don't see why Parliament will not align with him, then COVID will no longer exist.
So that's that now I'm still paying COVID-19 levy.
Yes, you're still paying COVID-19 levy. And George, it makes sense. The budget that was presented, George, was not a 2025 budget. It was a 2026 and a medium-term budget. So what he's telling you is, in effect, unless there's a reason for which something else ought to be done, is for 2026. Are we on the same page?
Yeah.
So from 2026, if Parliament passes the bill into law, then you would no longer pay the COVID levy. All right. But then there's a broader question that comes with it, George. And permit me to go back a little bit into history. It's important. If we do not appreciate the history, we cannot really guide ourselves on the way forward. We attempted introducing VAT in this country in 1994, 1995. We all know Kumi Prekon. We all know the failures that came with it. In 1998, we were successful when we introduced VAT at 10%. All right? In 2000, we decided to tell ourselves, let's elevate that. Okay? Let's elevate that. Let's elevate that by including education. So there was Get Fund. So you remember those days, the school buses, painted yellow, with
just like the HIPIC project.
Brilliant. Ghana Trust Fund project, blah, blah, blah. So the VAT included an earmark component for education. Then we got to 2004, 2003, 2004. Then we thought there was a need to say, okay, the education thing has worked well. Let's introduce something for health. There come NHIL. And to me, that was the first disturbance that we had with VAT. Because when you go and buy something, they will tell you are paying VAT and NHIL. But the rules, the principles were broadly the same thing.
Okay.
Why didn't we just say VAT in Ghana was 15% to make our lives easier? Fast forward, we all went all the way to 2017, 2018, I think 2018. We now say, oh, George, let's decouple. So we decoupled, celebrated the reduction of the standard VAT rate from 15 to 12.5, and then added the two other levies. By taking out the education that was embedded in VAT, the 2.5, and then now still administering the health with that. So now, when you go and buy something, you see VAT, you see NHIL, and you see Get Fund. But George, if I ask you...
And was it COVID-19 levy?
Then there was no COVID-19. Okay, COVID came in 2021.
So
at that point, George, if you talk to an average Ghanaian, what the effective VAT rate, and let me even bring you down to including COVID. George, you tell me the effective VAT rate is 21.9. So the average Ghanaian knows that what he or she is paying in terms of standard is 21.9.
Another 15 or...
Thank you, George. So why don't we just simply say that now VAT will be 20%? What is the point in breaking it? Yes, I appreciate that somebody will bring in the politics, but the average Ghanaian is smarter to tell you that the effective standard VAT rate is 21.9 and is going down to what? 20, hopefully, if Parliament endorses it. So I think we need to bite the bullet. We need to look at the technicals. I'm not saying let's ignore the politics. The politics is important because it is what leads us as a people. But I think it's about time we simply say the standard VAT rate in Ghana is 20%. Of course, what that does for us is that it puts us as one of the highest VAT rate countries in Africa. But now those who are looking at the figures know that that is indeed the effect. All right. So having established this, George, we've talked about COVID going, so we no longer have a levy. We will probably have e-levy. I hope government would appreciate that in light of the Earmarking Act, and George, I'm sure you've heard of that act, which we passed in 2017. What that act basically says is you can collect NHIL, we'll keep some, and we'll give some to the health fund. So the earmarking levy basically says that I can collect and replay with it the way I want to play with it. This new government came into power and said, no, for health and education, we're giving it back. So, George, nothing stops us through the earmarking levy to say VAT is 20%, but when I collect it, I will give this amount to health and that amount to education. All right. So having said that now, George, whenever government says I'm going to introduce a new VAT bill, George, what it means is that I'm going to do a massive change that would affect all facets of VAT. And you may want to ask, what are those facets of VAT? George, any VAT system works along these 4 principles. Products. Who should be registered? What rates should apply? And how I should account. For the sake of our audience, I'll repeat this for. Anytime you see a big thing come by way of VAT bill, it is because we are touching the 4 facets of VAT. What is the product? Who should charge VAT? What is the rate of tax? And lastly, how do I charge and account for this VAT? So those are the 4 things that is happening.
Yeah.
Now, so far in all the commentaries, you've not heard or seen anything happen about products. And I'll bring it home. George, when you go to a mall to go and buy chocolates, check on your invoice that you receive, you'll probably pay VAT on that. In the street, the guy that sells chocolates wouldn't charge you VAT. And the reason is simple. The guy at the mall or the mall operator is VAT registered because of threshold. The guy on the street does not meet that threshold, and so he's not registered. But even before we get there, it is for us to resolve the question as to whether chocolate itself should attract VAT or not. Let me bring it home. When you went to the university, you didn't pay VAT on your university fees because we have told ourselves that university education supervised by the ministry does not attract VAT. So the first thing is the product. So far, you've not heard anything about the product.
Yeah.
We don't know whether some products that are exempt will become taxable or products that are taxable will become exempt. And I'm doing this just to draw the attention of Ghanaians that let's all get involved. The research agenda, the Ghana building agenda, the Ghana we want that the budget kept talking about, it's for all of us. So let's not sit on the fence. Let's get involved and see which products are exempt and which products are taxable. But so far, in the public commentary, you don't hear anything. People should not wait, and then when Parliament now passes it, then you now complain that, I didn't know about this, I didn't know about that. That will not be fair to the government also. The next thing is the issue of the criteria, the registration. George, I will take you back again into history. At a point or in the early VAT days, George, we separated a condition for registering for goods. In other words, the 200 and the 750 we're talking about, because the government says I'm going to increase it from 250 to from 200 to 750. 750,000
There's
cities.
a yearly threshold.
Yearly threshold.
Yeah.
So far, it only lives it that way. My prayer, my hope, is that the rule will be the same for goods and will be the same for services. Let me bring the assignment home. I go to our traditional market. I have a baba and I have somebody that sells by the side. If I go to the baba who is a service person and he barbs my hair and he doesn't even reach the threshold of 200,000, should he charge me VAT? No. Why is it that when I go to the person who is selling and that person doesn't make 200,000, the person doesn't charge? So the essence I'm saying is that, or let me give you another example for the sake of our audience. I go to go and fix my car. Okay, the guy says he used some products, he serviced the vehicle, so there's a goods component, there is a services component. How do you decompose this easily? And one of the easiest things we need to do is just to ensure that the registration criteria for goods and for services is the same.
The same thing. Then.
Part of the things that we did to make our VAT system very complicated was because at a point we distinguished the criteria for goods and for services. And I hope that this new bill would not take that particular trend. Otherwise, we'll build in avoidable complexities. And before long, we'll start complaining again that our VAT is overly complicated. The third thing that, George, you need to be looking at is the threshold will increase from 200 to 750.
To 750.
That is a general registration threshold, George. General. It means that there are certain instances, if you're an entertainer and you are doing a show at the National Theatre, you may not make that amount, but you may still be required to pay VAT. All right? So this conversation that we're having of 200 to 750 are general conversations, broad mandatory conversations. Now, you would notice that when you look at the March budget, we talked about...
Mid-year.
No, the March one.
Oh, okay.
So the initial one, because 2024 was an election year. The initial one had issues of flat rates.
Yeah.
Okay, government says, I will abolish. Mid-year, I will abolish. But December or November 1, kept quiet about it. I'm not too sure whether government still wants to move ahead with the abolishment
Did
of
he
it.
announce it in the budget about it being...
There is nothing of flat rate, so go and check.
Okay.
So it was in March, it was in the review, but it's not mentioned in the December one, in the November one.
Yeah.
So that's why Guta and Co are complaining that, hey, hold on. In all this celebration, am I going to move from a 3+1, which is 4%, and then start paying 20%? Those are the part of their conversations.
Do you think they have a case or not?
Well, I think to a point, George, they have a case. My recommendation would be that government, between the 750 and $1 million, they should allow the people there to operate flat rate. And maybe this time not 3%, probably at 5%. And George, I'll give you the reason why I say 5%. At the time we introduced the 3%, and if I go strictly by the text, the equivalent VAT standard rate was 12.5. We went to 15. We still kept it at 12.5. We went to effectively 18% or so plus the whatever. We still left it at 3%. I think it's about time we let them appreciate that, look, I think 5% is a fair fee.
Yeah.
But if you are up to $1 million, please let us allow you. But beyond that, George, what is the criteria? If you are selling more than $1 million per year, and let me break that down, $1 million per year with a 50-week would translate into about 4,000 cedis a day of sales. Are you saying that you cannot get a bookkeeper or a liver school to help you do your input-output? I think those conversations need to be had. So if government says, I'm taking away VFRS, I understand what they wish to do. But I think let's meet those who are making halfway. But I think that let's give them a very limited scope to say 200 now is reduced up to 750. So 750 is now the level at which you begin to register for VAT.
I want you to hold on there because I just want to bring in Dr. Idul before you continue with this. Just to get his thought from the economic angle. Dr. Idul Sarkodie is a senior economics lecturer at the University of Ghana, Economics Department, and also executive director at the Center for Policy Scrutiny. I hope I got that right, Doc. So let me just get your preliminary thought basically on the issue about taxation, and let's look at the political economy, because don't forget that in all these things, politics is also at play as well. Or these people, the previous government didn't do this, you are doing that. Guta is now saying that, hey, be careful because we are going to see something like Medofwa Dadame. I mean, Doc, for you as an economist and holding the political economy constant, what should be government's approach in enforcing these tax measures for next year?
George, and good evening to everybody. You know, tax in a sense is used for several purposes. First, to raise revenue, and second, to alter consumption, so that if government wants to discourage the consumption of something, they will put on more taxes. And they want to encourage consumption of that particular thing, they reduce the tax or even abolish it altogether. Now, I'm sure what we are discussing now is about the revenue generation, not really about altering consumption.
Yeah.
Now, we go to the classroom and we know that the tax multiplier effect on GDP is negative. In other words, you know, if you put in more taxes, GDP reduces. So that somebody will ask, why do we impose taxes? The government also needs revenue, but the government expenditure multiplier effect on GDP is positive. So you collect the tax and give it to the government to spend prudently with the hope that the positive impact would outweigh the negative impact of the tax. That's why when you collect taxes and you give it to the government and they don't spend it prudently, it becomes more like a counterproductive effect, negative effect on the economy. Now, so if you want to raise revenue from taxes, the standard is that the tax growth rate should be equal to 2.5 times the GDP growth rate. That is the ideal.
Yeah.
The tax revenue growth rate should be 2.5 times the GDP growth rate. But Ghana has been doing around 1%, 1.5%. What does it mean? It means that in Ghana, the linkage between economic growth and taxation or taxes is not strong. It's a bit weak. You expect that as the economy grows and economic activities increase and incomes increase, people will pay taxes and government will collect more revenue. But we have seen that the linkage between taxation or taxes and economic activity in Ghana is a bit weak. We know the reasons, the informality of our economy, the fact that we cannot even tax the incomes of those in the informal sector, etc., etc. Now, I like the analysis done by my brother in the studio, but what I want to add to that is that in 2026, the government is putting its hope on compliance. The government already has abolished the e-levy, which was fetching the government around $2 billion, a little over $2 billion, cedis. Then they have also abolished the betting tax, or roughly about 400 million cedis. And now they have abolished the COVID-19 tax, which next year was projected to rake in about 3 billion Ghana cedis. And now let me give you some statistics. COVID-19 was giving us almost the same amount as the total royalties from oil and gas in Ghana. Can you imagine? Yes, this year, total royalties from oil and gas is estimated to be 2.9 billion Ghana cedis. COVID-19 levy will be giving us 2.8 billion Ghana cedis. So you've taken e-levy, 2 billion, you are going to take away COVID-19, another close to 3 billion. That's about 5 billion Ghana cedis that you have taken away. So that will bring down your revenue. But the government is saying that you can raise revenue, you can increase revenue by even abolishing taxes or reducing tax rates. When you increase the base, if more people are paying, it's better than few people paying a higher rate. So this government believes in bringing the rate down so that you get more people into the basket or the bracket to pay. That's how they want to. So it really focuses on compliance. So the key word, the action word that the government is going to use in 2026 is compliance, because they have reduced the rate and abolished some taxes. So the only way to up or get the shortfall is to enforce compliance. That's one. Number two, they also hope to use digital platform, because I saw in the budget they were mentioning things like using artificial intelligence by the GRA to rake in revenue. Now, the tax revenue as we see in Ghana accounts for 83% of total revenue and grants. Tax revenue accounts for 83% of total revenue and grants. However, the tax to GDP ratio is around 13-14%. And our peers are doing 20-25%. So you have a tax element that fetches 83% of your revenue, and yet as a ratio of GDP, it is fetching you less. That's why in my earlier submission, I talked about the weak linkage between tax and economic growth, because if it was stronger, then the tax to GDP ratio would have been higher. Okay, so where do we go from here? I think that the emphasis will be in two folds. First is the one my brother is talking about, enforcing compliance, getting people into the tax bracket, etc., etc. Now, the second submission I'll make, in addition to what he has said, is to emphasize on the non-tax revenue. Non-tax revenue. And examples are the royalties, our share in natural resources. And I'm making this point, I've been making this point, and I'll repeat it. Ghana is not getting enough from the natural resource that we have been blessed with. We are number one in terms of gold production in Africa. We are number 6 in the whole world. Our peers are Mexico and Kazakhstan. Ghana, Mexico, Kazakhstan produced 130 tons of gold last year. So if you ask me, where do I think the government will get more revenue to complement the already tax revenue that we have? I would say the non-tax revenues. And in this case, I'm talking about how to leverage the natural resource, increasing our shares in gold production, in crude oil production, in gas production. I was happy to hear or to see in the 2026 budget that GMPC is also going to begin their own exploration. In my view, this is a very good step that the country must take to increase our share in the natural resource, where we can get more non-tax revenue to complement the tax revenue that we have. And per the analysis that I chanced upon, Ghana can get about $5 billion annually from the natural resource that we have. If you do our maths right, we can get $5 billion annually to add to the existing tax revenue that we have. So, George, I think that the conversation should now be on the non-tax revenue. How do we position ourselves as a country to get enough from the gold, from the oil, from the gas, from the aluminium, manganese, iron ore, lithium? We are not going to start the lithium agreement. They are discussing in the parliament. So how do we position ourselves as a country to get enough from all these angles? For me, that is where the concentration must be, because we have seen examples from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Norway, USA, Russia, even Ukraine before before the war. These countries have taken advantage of the abundance of their natural resource to enrich themselves. Being a #1 producer of gold in Africa is not a small feat. We should leverage that to get more revenue and enrich ourselves as a country and transform the country. So we have a lot to do. Recently, I think the Ministry of Finance, one official was saying that very soon Ghana will be getting closer to the upper middle income status. Now, upper middle income status comes with certain responsibilities. It comes with good infrastructure. It comes with good roads, quality health care. I mean, we cannot be having gold with us, 130 tons of gold, and we still have poverty.
Welcome back to PM Express Business Edition as we look at the tax measures outlined in the 2026 budget and whether indeed it would help us to collect a little over 200 billion Ghana cedis by the end of next year. Engaging a director at PwC Ghana, Beku John Kwanzaa, and also an economist, a senior lecturer in Accounts Department, also executive director for Center for Policy Scrutiny, Dr. Edu Owusu-Sakwey. Doc, let me bring you back into this discussion, Doc, and want to get your thoughts. I mean, you've thought of these things in the lecture halls. Practicalizing these things, is government gambling with this exemptions thing and scrapping of the rate? And if I could use the word, playing on people's emotions that I've done all these things for you, so be compliant. Do you think that we would end next year hitting this target, or government has taken or is taking a big gamble?
The government has a social contract with us, with the voters. They campaigned on the abolishment of those taxes, and Ghanaians voted for them. And I think they want to honor whatever they campaign on, fulfill their promise. So first of all, it's a fulfillment of their campaign promise. Well, they have called some of those taxes nuisance. COVID-19, they called a nuisance. E-levy called nuisance. Many Ghanaians agree with them. Personally, hold a different view. I felt they could keep COVID-19 levy and rename it and transfer it or link it to a health infrastructure or health-related issue, financing. But hey, they have listened to Ghanaians and they have abolished it. So in the political economy sense, they want to make a point that they have listened to Ghanaians and they have fulfilled their campaign promise. So going forward, now that you have fulfilled your campaign promise and abolished them and restructure the VAT, again, they also want to make the point that they have put money back into the pockets of Ghanaians. So for example, the COVID-19 was expected to rake in a little over 3 billion Ghana cedis. And they are saying that now that 3 billion Ghana cedis will no longer come to government, but it will be in the hands of individuals and companies. You know that GDP, as we learned in the classroom, the components that make up the GDP are household consumption, like you and me. If you go to buy water, it's part of household consumption. And then government expenditure. If government pays salaries, whatever, government consumption expenditure. And then we have investment expenditure. Here, the investment expenditure, both public and private. So the public from government capex and the private for all individual like Joy FM, Joy TV, your investment. It becomes part of the total investment. And the net export. So they are seeing that another way to grow the economy is to give the money back to the individuals who will then spend and then increase household consumption or increase private investment. So that's how the government is seeing it. That's what I said, that there's nothing wrong if there's a strong linkage between tax and GDP. Because this thing that the government has done, and they want to enforce compliance, if the linkage between tax and GDP was strong, it would have given government more revenue.
But, sorry to cut in. I mean, I asked this question because some will say that we've seen this before, where nuisance tax and Abeku help bill, they were scrapped and all those things. Compliance, I had this when I was way back in school. So
yes.
If you put on the economist's hat independently, do you think that we will raise this revenue with all these things that we've done? Or listen, it's a huge challenge going forward.
We have to also go back to history before we can answer this question. What is the Ghana history? The Ghana history is that we have not been able to enforce compliance to raise enough revenue. And just recently in the year 2017, when President Akufo-Addo's administration was sworn into office, they abolished their first budget, they abolished like 17 taxes. And that led to a revenue shortfall. They could not make up for the loss. So that's the history we have as a country. So that's why people are raising doubt based on history. CPS, we also raise doubt based on history about the revenue shortfall that we are going to face in the year 2026.
And so you agree that it's going to happen, right?
What is going to happen, the shortfall?
Yeah, shortfall revenue.
Yeah, possibly. And I've given you a history. So if anything at all, history has taught us that Ghana, anytime we abolish and remove taxes, we suffer from revenue shortfall. That's number one. Number two reason is that compliance takes time to gather momentum. So if you abolish a tax in 2026 and you enforce compliance, the likelihood that you get enough revenue in the year 2026, in the year that you abolish the taxes and enforce compliance, is very low. The likelihood to raise more revenue from that is low. So you give yourself some time. That's why we call the medium term. So maybe things will be better from 2028 going. That's about 3 years, because compliance takes time. There's always a time lag, and compliance takes time to gather momentum before it becomes, have a multiplier effect on the economy. So, given the history and given the time lag, there is some doubt about the possible, capacity of the government to raise revenue. And let me end this point. Again, history is telling us that the ideal deviation, revenue deviation, is between +6 and -3%. Okay, but as a country, in only 3 years have we achieved that. In the year 2015, 2018, and 2021. These are the only years where our deviation has fallen between or within the ideal deviation rate of +6, -3. All other years, our revenue has fallen short by more than -3. In fact, a typical example is the year 2025. According to the budget, Ghana is going to face a revenue shortfall of -4.7. And -4.7 is way below the -3 ideal target that we have to fall. So again, this is not on our side.
Okay. So Doc, I'll tell you in 30 seconds, your final thoughts in 30 seconds, Doc.
I think that because we still have the IMF program with us, government is going to be prudent. In the year 2026, they may behave like the 2025. If they don't get revenue, they will not spend. So no revenue, no expenditure. And that's going to hurt the economy in some way. And I just want to hope that compliance will pick up, that they will get enough revenue, and Ghanaians will take advantage of this low rate of VAT and the abolishment of the COVID-19 and pay taxes. Those who have been avoiding and evading taxes, they should all pay taxes so that government can get enough revenue to pay us, to pay lecturers.
Of course, no strike next year. Thank you so much. That's a promise from a Doc, of course. I mean, Abeku, I want you to put on your economist hat or the tax hat. Are we going on a gambling path with this approach?
Well, I would say I don't think we are going on a gambling path. George, I hold this view. if we believe that the more the taxes, the higher the taxes, the more the revenue, there's a very simple problem we haven't had. Government can just raise taxes to 50%, 80%, and we should get more. But we know that beyond a certain point, people would react differently. People would run away from the taxes that you thought you were going to get. So I don't hold a view that the more the taxes, the more necessarily the revenue that you get. I don't hold a view. I hold the view that as you improve on compliance, things would get better. So just let me give you the numbers. In 2024, the revenue collection as published by the Revenue Policy Division of the Ministry of Finance was that we collected revenue of 153.6 billion. The projection for this year is 189. And this is a year where the government budget was presented in March with several, I will remove this, I will remove that. But the projection clearly shows that the GRA would actually collect a lot more than it expects. So relative to budget, they may miss budget, but I expect that there will be growth in revenue.
But that's different from the type, because some are saying that you have the numbers, but from what we hear, what we report on, we heard this thing about compliance. We heard this thing about, the electronic VAT systems and all those things. But still, the growth in revenue or the tax GDP was still a challenge. And some are saying that, why don't you do a gradual phase out? Because you are gambling with this approach.
George, the tax GDP, right in front of the screen, I explained to you, it's a simple thing, tax over GDP. So the moment you give certain concessions, you may not get in those revenues. Of course, somebody will say when you give concessions and people get into agribusiness, they will employ more, so PAY would come in. I understand those things. But I believe let's give the government an opportunity to see what happens. 2024 revenue is below what is projected for 2025. So there were taxes that were removed, government increased revenue. 2025, going into 2026, I don't have reason to believe that because COVID is going to be taken off, etc., the government would not grow revenue over 2025. Budget may be missed.
They will grow, but would they meet their target?
Well, they may miss, and that is why we need to wait for the mid-year. So the possibility that your initial budget may not be in line is the reason why the laws of Ghana tells you you have an opportunity to come back to present a mid-year. So let's give them the opportunity and let's have this conversation somewhere in July or August 2026.
Director of Tax Legal Services at PwC Ghana, Beku Jankwanza, he was my guest in studio doing some 101 there. Dr. Edu Sisakode is an executive director at the Center for Policy Scrutiny and also a senior lecturer at the Econs Department at the Premier University of Ghana, of course. And my name is George Wiafe. I'm your host. Another debate to go on in your homes and offices about how best can we deal with the revenue challenge. This has been PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.